What's up, YouTube? I just finished playing Little Nightmares 2 with my daughter, and of course, the ending kind of upset her a little bit. Um, she had a hard time kind of understanding what was really going on. She's a lot. She's young. She's just gonna be 8 soon enough, but she loves the game a lot. And after a few conversations to let her understand what the game was really about and what happened with Six and what happened with Mono at the end and everything, she started to understand it a little bit better and, just loves it. She loved Little Nightmares 1, and she also loves this one. But it got me thinking, like, I wonder if anybody, because I was expressing everything that was kind of going on to her to get her sort of understand what was happening, um, including the underlying themes, um, in a way that I felt was appropriate for her, of course, at her age. But it really got me wondering, has anybody really talked about this at all? And I realized that there was nobody on YouTube really delving deep into the theme of Little Nightmares 2. And in a nutshell, I think that the game is pretty much just talking about growing up and how adults and basically society itself kills what it is to be a child. It kills children's imagination and sense of wonder and sense of self in order for them to basically become like everybody else, to become a norm, to become like just a face in the crowd, which is a lot easier for society to manipulate. We can't have different people with different opinions because we need people gathered in a group opinion in order to elect a president from a specific governing body. For example, in the United States, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. You can't really have your own personal individual view of things. It needs to fall in line with one or the other so that they can continue on with basically, their machine, so to speak. And that's like the overarching kind of theme that's going on, but it also starts to play into like the specifics of what you see. So at the beginning of the game, we have this character who's coming out of this seemingly out of nowhere in a forest. Now, of course, he came out of the TV, and there's the whole thing of like pretty much kind of like a time loop sort of happening from Mono's older self and Mono's younger self, and the specifics of Six as a character and all that. But I'm not talking about those things, because that's more, as far as I'm concerned, like the geeking out on it sort of information. The thing that I love the most about Little Nightmares, including overall as a series, and this includes Little Nightmares 1 and 2, is that they have these themes that they're trying to express. For example, I made a video earlier of Little Nightmares 1, and I felt that the theme was basically talking about human trafficking, specifically children. And in Little Nightmares 2, it starts off where Mono's coming, basically just this child and Six, another child, who are living in the forest. What I feel that means, and an artistic interpretation of that, is that they're these wild beings. They're at their rawest form, their primal form of being a human being. And I don't mean those terms in a negative way whatsoever. I actually mean them in a very positive way, where like the essence of being human, the desire to experience things, the desire to create things, everything that a child has like in abundance that we very much lose as we grow up, because largely the school systems tell you over and over and over again how your individual personal answer to a problem is false, because there is only one answer that is correct. However, history proves that that is absolutely not the case whatsoever. And in fact, the people among us that are the most successful, financially, mentally, etc., and so on, are the people that actually stick to their own personal solutions. And they don't just follow a cookie cutter blueprint that was laid out before them in school. That basically leads you to what one would call a dead end job. If you want to create your own world, if you want to create your own jobs for yourself and thus other people because you have a business, you're going to have to think outside the box. So that creativity, that longing for whatever, it's a very wild, instinctual, primal existence of human beings, and it's represented by this forest. They leave this forest, they flee from this forest, because one of the things that's there in that forest is aloneness. And that actually comes into play with Mono's name, meaning one, alone, singular. He's alone in the forest, and he finds six. And this is the first thing of entering into society. And they enter into society together. They take this long, foggy trip, long quote unquote, right? It's not actually that long, but this long, foggy trip across this body of water, and they come to the city. The city is the representation of society. It's the other people that are here now. There's not just you. You know, when you're a child, you're by yourself, you're in your own world. Now it's experiencing the world with everybody else. And very quickly we get introduced into the school area and the teacher and the other children there. And right away, one of the things that I noticed was that the children are hollow in their heads, and they also all look exactly the same. And that's what school does. It was a perfect artistic representation, in my opinion, one of the best, basically since like the animated Pink Floyd's The Wall, of what the school system does and how sinister it actually is. The way that that teacher is looming over all the children in the classrooms, the way that the children, when they get let out for like a recess or lunch, right? There's a point where you walk through their little cafeteria and stuff, and all they're doing is just ripping everything apart. They're just absolutely maniac levels of wild. And it's the wild that's like the bad side of it being wild, the bad side of the primal instincts. And that's because their other side is being oppressed and suppressed so much by this overwhelming school system, by this, in the game, it's, you know, the teacher, that once they're left to their own devices, they basically just run amok like, you know, ADHD maniacs. And but I thought that was a very interesting thing, that they're hollow in their head. When you crack them, they literally, their heads split apart and there's nothing on the inside, and they also all look alike. And then of course the teacher is the authoritative figure, and she's depicted as just being absolutely terrifying, of course, and it was very accurate as to what it felt like, you know, when I think for pretty much all of us that can think, right, a little bit for ourselves, still can look back, and yeah, school sort of felt that way. You know, it was very overwhelming, and you felt this real sense of dread and oppression from it all, because it was killing you, and it killed a lot of us. Not many people actually make it out the other side with themselves truly intact, if any of us ever do, really. And you know, I thought that that was a really, really amazing start from that, where it goes from this. It was just so smooth, you know. Like yes, there's this story of Mono and Six and all this stuff, and the tall man, and you know, these creatures in this world and whatnot. But the way that the narrative was actually depicting on this much deeper level this overall theme of growing up and what it's like. That's exactly how it is. Like you're this wild, primal, beautiful, independent and individual entity when you're a child, and then you get met basically with school and society and everybody in it. And shortly after that, they break out of the school finally. There's a few things that maybe in another video I'll talk about, like a lot more specific things and whatever. But the next stage of it, when they finally broke out of the school, the next stage of life that they get to is the hospital, which is the understanding or the realization rather of mortality. They start seeing all these pieces of body parts, right? As you start aging into a teenager, your body starts to become this very interesting world unto itself, where you're exploring different things. And of course there's no penises and vaginas in the game, of course, because that is obviously one of the let's call it the apex of teenage exploration of one's own body and others as well. But it was still sort of showing that the hand being just a hand, running, as one of the monsters that was running around chasing you, the limbs all over the place, the mannequins themselves were just pieces of the thing. And it was, I believe none of them really had or very few of them had a head. If they did have a head, it was like wrapped up, you couldn't see a face and things like that. I think that was all basically talking about like the exploration of the body when you become a teenager. And of course, when you do explore that, one of the things that's also happening in your mind during that age especially, and it happens earlier for some and later for others and some never, and so on and so forth, when you're exploring your body, what you realize is your own mortality. And death basically becomes a reality at that point. And that in itself forces you to grow up a little bit more. So the first stage, they grew up somewhat because school and being introduced to society, and then in the hospital area, it's the discovery of their own bodies, who they are, and thus the discovery of mortality and therefore death. And this is increasing, or rather moving them along down the path of growing up. And then trying to think now, like after that, I think they end up in the area where there's like a lot of different adults and things like that, looking at like TVs and things like that, and you start that's when those characters are introduced into the game, where it's these adults that are absolutely mesmerized by TV, to the point where some of them are committing suicide. If you ever turn the TV off, they become just ravenous, and run after you to attack you, or run after the next screen. And this is another insight into like what our society is actually like, in regards to like when you finally become an adult, because of all these other things and your own individuality being ripped from you, all you have left is to watch entertainment in order to fulfill any existence whatsoever, because like you're not supplying the kindling for your own fire, so you have to get that kindling from somewhere else. Something else has to keep you ignited and interested and wanting to live at all. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't. In whether or not, like in some cases, it actually really does kill people. But in most every case, pretty much, it metaphorically kills people. It's the last nail in the coffin, so to speak. Going from school and then teenagehood and then finally into adulthood, where you are pretty much just beaten down. The last nail in the coffin of you losing all individuality is just giving into it and not caring anymore, and just handing over yourself and your entire existence and what you could have been, your potential as a human being, is being handed over to complacency. And when those things that allow us to be complacent, the entertainment, right? And that's all that is. The TV is just a depiction of entertainment as a whole, is taken away from any of these people. They lose their minds. I mean, picture anybody you know right now, and they don't have their phone anymore. A lot of people can't even go take a dump in the bathroom without their phone anymore. They constantly need to be feeding in with this flow of entertainment. I feel like the apex of that in reality is social media. I think it is absolutely destroying us as a society. And I think that this game is talking about that once you get to that part of the game, that it's the entertainment, the apex of that entertainment being social media, because it's literally nothing. It is never ending, and makes you feel as though you're actually part of something that you are absolutely not. You feel as though you're being an individual when you completely are not being an individual. And the cycle is completed at that point. And yes, all those people that lose those types of things usually become very angry and whatever, and some of them very violent. And definitely, like in the home, there's a lot of parents that probably shouldn't be parents, in my opinion, but they get lost in that kind of stuff. And if they're not being entertained and basically distracted by how empty they are, because of the way that they had to grow up through society, they turn around and they take it out on their children. Now, I'm not saying that they physically attack them like they do in Little Nightmares 2, but they do, harm to their children, most likely psychologically and whatnot. And that was pretty much it. You know, the end of the game wraps that up very nicely. You know, there's all these doors which is basically like the choices, right, that Mono has to take in order to save Six, who Six is basically held back in becoming a monster from that torture of her past. Because I've always felt that the song that is sort of hummed in Little Nightmares 1 when Six gets hungry, sounds like a child humming that song. It was like a lullaby that her mother, the geisha, used to sing to her. And obviously her mother is a source of pain, and for the reasons that I sort of talk about in Little Nightmares 1 and the video that I made about that. So, and that's how like a lot of this stuff is repeated. It's hereditary in that way. It's like your parents pass their demons on to you, and then you pass those same demons on to your children, and they pass those demons on to their children, and so on and so forth. And it's altered a little bit every time, but it's ultimately the same larger thing, which is what Little Nightmares 2 is talking about. So Mono is trying to protect Six from that, which is why he destroys the little music box that's playing that lullaby for her. He's trying to sever that so that she can maintain her innocence. And there's other reasons and other things, of course, like I said, because there's another story, which is the more shallow story that's being told. But I'm talking about the deeper meaning behind things. And so even to the point where it gets to the end where they're running away, and at the very end of the game, and she drops him, right? I personally interpreted that as she's letting him go because he's growing up. Mono is growing up. And in every single picture that you have of Mono and Six, it looks like he's her older brother, or he's older, he's more like going into teenagehood where she's still a child. And she sees that in him and drops him. She's scared by that and lets him go, because a lot of people were like, why would she do that? And they give all these different fan theory reasonings, and I agree with them too. But again, that's much more on like the superficial story that's there, which is a good story too, by the way. I'm not trying to trash it whatsoever. But like I said, this video is talking about the more subconscious, the deeper meanings, like what they're really trying to show and put like a mirror up to us as the viewer. What are they truly really talking about? And like I said, they're talking about growing up, and so he protected her by severing that thing, which is usually a catalyst. It's pain and hatred and anger that is usually catalyst to people growing up. He spared Six that by destroying her connection to her mother, that memory through the lullaby, and Six remained innocent. And when she saw him and looked into his eyes, she realized who he was going to be, of course, but she realized he was growing up, and so she let him go. And of course, even at the end of it, where he stands up on the chair, he sort of accepts what it is and he grows up. And what causes him to grow up are all the eyes staring at him, which is the what happens in our world. That's it in a nutshell. It's people looking at you and expecting you to be a certain way, because we can grow older physically, but we don't have to necessarily grow older mentally. Of course, we're going to become more aware of things and more intelligent, but there's a spark of life and a real being, like a real human, that you lose from when you're a child. And that is because people are staring at you, and their eyes, their gaze on you, them constantly watching you, is what causes you to conform to a norm. And that's what that represented. The eyes are staring at him, forcing him to grow up, forcing him to not be mono anymore, right? Not being one, not being an individual, not being, who he was, and forcing him to grow up into just another person in society. And that's what scared Six to make her drop him. And yeah, and I know that there's like a little extra hidden ending where Six is there and her stomach is growling and this and that. And like I said, I might go into another video where I go into more details of this at some other point, but this is already like almost a 23-minute video, and I'll end it there. But yeah, that's what I really think that they're saying, and the game is fantastic. Once again, I think they just absolutely nail it as far as from the perspective of an artistic presentation of like an idea. The first one being about human trafficking, and this one being about what it really is like to grow up, lose yourself, your true self, and enter the world as an adult. And in many cases, it sucks.